In this video, we're going to talk about interest, particularly simple interest. And so interest is just a fee that's charged for the use of money, and that could be in the form of, buying a home, getting a mortgage, getting a car loan, student loans, a payday advance. There's interest charged with credit cards, any of those situations where you're borrowing money for something. And so there's two different types of interest. So there's simple interest and then compound interest. And like I said, we're going to focus on simple interest in this video, in this module, but let's just look at both just so we can compare and contrast. So simple interest is like it sounds. I mean, it's simpler. It's simpler because it's just a one-time fee that the person pays. And so, for example, let's say, your friend lends you $20 and you pay him back $25. Just, you pay him more because of appreciating that, they loaned you money. So you would pay $5 in interest because $25 minus 20, if we subtract, there's a $5 difference. So you pay $5 in interest. Now, keep in mind, we're not talking about the interest rate here. We're just talking about the actual amount of money that this person paid in interest. This next one, let's say this person has paid $4,000 in payments for a car, but they could have bought the car for $2,800. So they paid extra since they didn't have that money up front. And so if we subtract, so we always subtract to find the difference. So I'm just finding the difference between these two numbers. If we subtract these, we get $1,200. And so they paid an extra $1,200 in interest, in simple interest, in exchange for, being loaned this money. And so in contrast with compound interest, it's definitely trickier to understand because, and it's more complex, I should say. The interest on the loan accrues on the initial principal. So let's talk about what that is. And we define principal right here. So principal is the amount of money borrowed or invested, so the initial amount that the person wants to borrow. So with compound interest, you're paying interest on that initial amount as well as any interest added over that period of time. And so that interest can add up really quickly. And so we're going to study that in the next module. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at the different variables that are in the simple interest formulas. And so these are right here. And then we're going to identify those formulas and we're going to do some examples. And so there's really four main types of variables that are important to understand. So we've got principal. We already talked about that one, and that's always uppercase P in the formula. And that represents the amount of money borrowed or invested. And then we have rate, which is always lowercase r. It's the percent of the principal charged for borrowing money, and it's always written in a decimal form. So that's really important. So say, for example, the interest rate on a loan was 6%. When you're using the interest or the simple interest formula, we're going to write r equals 0.06. because that's the decimal equivalent. And then remember, with percentages, all you have to do is drop the percent, write the decimal at the end of the number, and move it 2 spots to the left, filling in any placeholder zeros if necessary. And then we've got time, so that's the amount of time that the money is being borrowed or invested. And the time always has to be written in years, and so that's really important. There could be a situation where maybe you're doing a problem where the problem gives you months, and if they do, you're going to always have to convert to years. So remember that there's 12 months in 1 year. So say, for example, the problem said that someone took out a loan for, 24 months. You can always take the months divided by 12, and that'll give you the years. So in this case, 24 divided by 12 is 2, so 24 months is the same thing as 2 years. And then lastly, future value, that's always uppercase A. It's the amount of the loan or investment plus the interest that's paid or earned. And so basically the total value in the end that per investment that the person ends up making in the end. So like if we go up to this car payment example up here, the $4,000 would be the future value because in the end, that's the total that this person paid for the car, assuming that, they didn't pay anything extra like a down payment or something, but that's for another problem. So let's go ahead and jump into the simple interest formulas. So to find simple interest, we can write I stands for interest, simple interest, uppercase I. We're going to take the principal times the rate times the time. And just remember, rate is always as a decimal, time is always in years. And then the future value formula, there's actually a couple of ways you can think of this. I think it's really the best way to start thinking about future value is really just this idea over here, that future value is just equal to the principal, the initial amount, plus any interest that the person spent. And so where it says down here, note, we can use A equals P plus I to solve for any unknown variable in this formula. That's really what this is saying up here. Future value is A equals the principal plus any interest that accrues. So that's the simplest way to think of it. And then we can write, there are a couple of other formulas. They're really not different formulas. They're just a different way to write this one. We can also write it as A equals the principal plus, and instead of interest, remember up here, interest is principal times rate times time. So we can write PRT. So really, P plus PRT is the same thing as P plus I. It's just a different way to write it. Or we can even take out this P. Notice the principal term is in both of those, or principal variable is in both those terms. We can pull out the P and use the distributive property and write 1 plus RT. And if you imagine multiplying this P into both those terms, you're going to get this equation right here. So all three of these equations represent the exact same thing. They're just, written a little bit differently depending on the problem that you're doing. And so let's go ahead. I've got 5 examples for you that we're going to do together. And so let's start this first one. So it says find simple interest and future value for a loan of $2,600 for 3 years at a rate of 8%. So when I read these problems, the first thing I do is I take the numbers that I'm given and I write them down and I try to identify the variable that they represent. So if the loan is $2,600, then that's going to be P. So P is equal to $2,600. Okay, we know that 3 years, so that's going to be my term is going to be 3, and then rate 8% is 0.08. Okay, and then find the simple interest. So I don't know what I is, so I'm going to say I equals question mark. I don't know what A equals. Okay, I'm going to start by using the simple interest formula. So I know that I want to find both of these, but if you look at the future value formulas, all of those involve interest. And so we're going to find interest first, and then we'll go ahead and find the future value. So I'm just going to write down I equals PRT. Okay, so that's my step 1. And then I'm going to plug in everything I know. So I don't know I, but I know the principal, and I know the rate, and I know the time is 3. And so if I multiply all those numbers together, so 2,600 times 0.08 times 3, I end up getting $624. So that's the amount of money that this person has to pay in interest if they take out a loan for $2,600. So considerable amount, really, when you think about it. And then for the future value, so let's see, what equation should we use? We've already done the principal times rate times time, so I'm actually going to just use the simpler version up here. So principal plus interest. So, and I know both of those amounts. So the principal is $2,600 plus the interest is $624. And so if I add those together, I get $3,224. And so what that represents is that's the total that this person ends up investing in this, with this loan when it's all said and done. Okay, so let's look at simple interest example 2. To meet payroll during a down period, a company needed to borrow $2,000 at 11% simple interest. So right away, I'm just going to go ahead and write that down. So borrow, so that means principal is $2,000. And then my rate, 11%, which is 0.11 as a decimal. The future value, so that's A. So the future value of the loan was $2,055. So they borrowed $2,000, but in the end, they ended up paying $2,055. Find the term T in years, so T, we don't know what that is, and then convert your answer to number of months, okay? So let's look at what we have and then look at our equations. And so I want to find T, so if I look up here, you know, the simple interest formula has T in it, and I've got the principal, and I also have rate, but if I want to find T, I would also need to know I, and since I don't know I, I'm going to come down here to the future value, and I'm actually going to pick this one right here because I know future value, and I know principal, and I don't know interest, so that'll help me solve for interest since I know two of the three variables. So step one is I'm going to find I using A equals P plus I. Okay, so I'm going to write down A equals P plus I and plug in everything I know. So $2,055 equals the principal plus I. And really, we could just even think about this and not even use the formula. If they borrowed $2,000 and ended up paying $2,055, we can see that there's a $55 interest charge there. So, and we can do that by solving the formula also. So either way, if you just want to reason through it, that's a great way to do it also. So they paid $55 in interest. Now I can go ahead and use the I equals PRT formula to find T, because now I know what the interest is. It's $55. The principal is $2,000. The rate is 0.11, and the T we don't know. So that's the unknown. And so to solve this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify the side with the T. So I'm going to take the 2,000 and I'm going to multiply it by 0.11 and I get 220. So 220T equals 55. And then if I want to solve for T, I need to divide both sides by 220 because then these cancel and leave T alone. And then I need to divide 55 by 220 on the left. So 55 divided by 220. And I end up getting 0.25. Okay, so that's in years. So 0.25 years. So that's like, if we write it as a fraction, a quarter of a year. Okay, and so it makes sense. I can see why, you know, we're being asked to find the number of months because that would be helpful. Anything less than a year, it makes more sense to find the number of months. And so we can just take a quarter of 12 months because 12 months represents a year. So if we want to take a quarter of 12 months, remember in math, of often means times. So we can take 1/4 times 12, which is just 3. So 3 months. Now, if you're unable to do this, you know, in your head and reason through that, you can always use your calculator. So the TI-34 has this cool N over D button. You can do 1, use your down arrow, 4th, and then times 12. And get 3 that way. If you have a different type of calculator, a graphing calculator, just use parentheses and do 1 divided by 4. That'll represent 1/4 times 12, and you can do it that way too. Let's look at example 3. So Sour Pickles Company invested $11,250 for 8.5 years and received $2,150 in simple interest. So I'm going to just write those down real quick. So our P value, so that's what they invested. So the initial investment is $11,250, our principal, 8.5 years. So that means time equals 8.5, and then received $2,150, that's simple interest, so that's I. What was the rate? So I'm going to say R equals question mark, because what was the rate that the investment was paid? And so let's go up to our formulas here, and we're going to find one that allows us to plug in all of our numbers and solve for R. And this simple interest formula, it looks like that would do the trick. So I equals PRT. So I'm going to plug in what I know. So I is 2150, our principal, 11,250. I don't know R, and then time is 8.5. Okay, so let's talk about how to solve this equation. So on the right-hand side, we want to get R by itself. We've got these two numbers here. Now remember, so multiplication is commutative, which means we can multiply in any order. So I could actually write it as 11,250 times 8.5 times r. It could be in that order. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to multiply these two guys here, and that way we'll get one number next to r, which will make it a little simpler. So 1250 times 8.5. Whoops, that didn't do 8.5. 11,250 times 8.5. There we go. Okay, so we've got 95,625 times R equals 2,150. And so now all I have to do is divide both sides by 95,625 to solve for R. So in my calculator, 2,150 divided by 95,625, and I get this decimal for R. So actually I should have given myself a little bit more room here. So I'm going to write down, I'm going to actually write R right here. So R equals 0.022483666. Okay, and what we want to make sure we do for these kinds of problems is before we round, so notice I don't think I read this part yet, but round your answer to the nearest 1/10%. Before we round, we want to convert this to a percentage. So I'm going to take this decimal and I'm going to move it 2 spots to the right. This finds the percent. So the percent is going to be 2.248366, and that's the percentage. Now I'm going to go ahead and round that to the nearest 1/10%. So the tenths place is just going to be the number to the right of the decimal, the first number to the right of the decimal, and so I look to the number to the right of that. It's a 4, so it tells me to leave that 2 alone, and so my answer is going to be 2.2%, and that's going to be the rate that the investment paid. Now let's look at example 4. So for a new set of tires, which cost $359.32, so that's going to be our principal, Anchor financed the tires for 1.25 years, so time equals 1.25 years, at a monthly payment of $26.81 per month. Now that number, we don't have any variables that we've talked about so far that represent monthly payment, but I'm just going to write that down. So he paid $26.81 per month. Find the interest rate. So R equals, say question mark, we don't know. So we've got to think about what this number right here tells us, because this is information that's going to help us. And let's think about what we could do with this number so that it could be helpful in using one of these formulas to solve for R. So if we look at this formula up here, I equals PRT, we've got the principal, we have the time, we don't have the rate, we need the interest. If we're going to solve for R, we have to have I, because we have to have all of the variables except the one we're trying to solve. So if we want to find the interest, we can actually find that using this monthly payment. So what we can do is we can figure out the total that he ended up paying over the life of this loan for these tires, and then figure out how that differed from the initial principal to find that interest amount. So if he had the vehicle for, or not vehicle, if he had the loan for 1.25 years, let's figure out how many months that is. So 1.25 years, if we multiply that by 12, then we get the number of months. So I'm just going to put parentheses, 1.25 times 12 equals 15 months. Or you could also just think about it, 1.25 year is 15 months. And so if we take his monthly payment, $26.81, and we multiply it by 15, so $26.81 times 15, then we get $402. And so that's the amount of money that that he paid in the end. And so what we can do here is we can find the difference between that number and the principal to find our I. And so we can use this formula right up here. So the future value equals P plus I. So the 402.15, that's the future value. That's the end amount or total amount that this person paid. Principal is $359.32 plus I. And so we basically just subtract these two numbers. So if we solve this formula, we end up subtracting $359.32 from that A value. So 402.15 minus $359.32. So we end up getting an interest amount of $42.83. And again, you can even just reason through this. You can just, think, okay, well, if I find the difference between what the tires cost and what the person paid in the end, then that's going to tell me how much interest that they paid. And just think about it that way. Now that we have this interest amount, now we can go ahead and use the I equals PRT formula. So I equals PRT. So my interest is $42.83 and my principal is $359.32 times my rate, which I don't know, times my time, which is 1.25 years. And so now what I can do is I can multiply these two numbers just to simplify that right-hand side. So I'm going to take $359.32 times 1.25. Okay, so I still have the $42.83 on the left equals $449.15 times R. And now I want to solve for R. So I'm going to divide both sides by $449.15. Those cancel out, which is great because R ends up being by itself. So $42.83 divided by $449.15. And I end up getting a pretty big long decimal. So what I'm going to do is convert this to a percent and then round. Okay, so there's our decimal for R, and now I'm going to convert that to a percent. So I'm going to move the decimal 2 spots to the right, and that gives me 9.5, and then all of those numbers. And then that's the percentage, and now I'm going to go ahead and round. So it says round to the nearest hundredth place. So I'm going to identify the place values. So the hundredth place is this place value right here, two numbers out from the decimal. And then I'm going to look to the right. Since that's a 5, this 3 is going to bump up to a 4. So my final answer is going to be 9.54%. All right, so last example, simple interest example 5, and this is actually my favorite one because I think it's the most applicable to real life. So suppose you need to buy flooring that costs $3.50 per square foot for a room with 120 square feet. The tax rate is 6%. You're offered a deal where you will pay $31 per month for 18 months. And so this happens all the time. We have these, monthly payment options, and we have to decide, well, do we want to pay for it all up front, or do we want to pay for the monthly payment? And so we're just going to, this problem is going to walk us through how to find the cash price and then also find the total that we would actually pay with the payments and kind of look at what that interest rate would be, and then make a decision whether or not, or at least get the amount of information you would need to make a decision on how you want to pay for this flooring. So for part A, we're going to find the cost of the flooring including tax. And so if the flooring is $3.50 per square foot, so $3.50 per square foot, and there's 120 square feet, we need to multiply those two numbers to find the total cost of the flooring. So when we do that, we get $420. But this doesn't include tax, and it asks us to find the cost including the tax. And so the tax rate is 6%. So we need to find 6% of $420. And so of in math, we write a times symbol, and then 6% is 0.06. So 0.06 times 420. So that'll give us our tax. And so $25.20 is going to be our tax. If I can get my pen to work. Okay, so $25.20, that is our tax. And I don't know why I'm circling that, because actually we want to just find the total price, or our p-value. So our total cost is going to be the cost of the flooring, so $420 plus the $25.20, and that'll give us $445.20. So we can put that in the blank up here. And that's our principal if we're considering taking out a loan to buy this flooring, which is basically what we'd be doing if we did the monthly payment option. So next step, find the total amount paid if you decide to do the payment plan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the payment per month. So that's this $31 per month. So $31 per month times 18 months. So if we multiply those two numbers together, we get $558. Okay, and that is going to be our future value. So the total we would pay if we went the payment route. And so now this next step says use the formula, but we can reason through this also. We can just think about, we want to figure out how much interest you will pay. And so if you're paying $445.20 right here, that's how much you're paying cash, and then $558, that would be the payment plan. If you want to find the amount of interest you're being charged, well, you just need to subtract the two. So you can think of it that way, or you can use this formula. So A is the $558 equals the principal is $445.20 plus I, and then you go ahead and solve those solve the formula by subtracting $445.20 from both sides, which is just what I suggested when we reasoned through. So we subtract these two numbers and we end up getting a difference of $112.80. And so that's our interest, $112.80. And so at this point, the next and last step, we're going to find the interest rate. But just, as a consumer, that's the important dollar amount here to look at is, do you want to pay an additional $112.80 to pay for this flooring? Is it worth it to you to pay that additional amount of money so that you don't have to fork out this amount of cash in the beginning? And so last step, we're going to find the interest rate. I'm just going to scroll up here so I have a little bit more room. I'm going to use the I equals PRT formula. So I equals PRT. I'm going to take my interest, $112.80 equals my principal, $445.20 times the rate. That's what I'm trying to find. T is in years. Okay. So T right now, we're going to take 18 months. We're going to divide that by 12. So we always take the months divided by the years to get the years. And then we get T equals 1.5. Or you could just think about it. 18 months is 1.5 years. So 1.5. And then I'm going to multiply these two numbers together. I'm going to simplify the right-hand side here. Multiplication is commutative. It means you can multiply in any order. So this R doesn't necessarily have to stay in the middle. It could be on the right-hand side, and we can put these two together. So 445.20 times 1.5. So we get 667.8. R equals 112.80, and then I'm going to divide both sides by 667.8. Okay, and then I'm left with R equals, here, let's go ahead and do that. So 112.80 divided by 667.8. Okay, and I've got a long number, and just like in previous examples, we're going to write down this long number first before we do any rounding. 168912848. Okay, so we write it down, and then I'm going to convert it to a percent. So I'm going to move the decimal 2 spots to the right. So I get 16.8912848. And then I look for my rounding direction. So it says, let's see, round to the nearest tenth of a percent. So that's one digit after the decimal. I look to the right, it's a 9. So that 9 tells me to bump that 8 up to a 9. So the rate is approximately 16.9%. So that's a really high interest rate. So I know I said before, just look at this 112.80 number and that's how you could decide whether or not you wanted to pay that amount to do the monthly payment. But it's also helpful to find the interest rate just to see, you compare this to other rates. So say maybe you have a credit card that has a rate that's lower than 16.9%. It would be better financially to put this on a credit card and pay that off potentially, if you're going to make payments on time and pay it in full, then maybe do the payment plan. So it allows you to maybe shop around for different types of loans to pay for the flooring if you're going to go that route. So hopefully this helps. As always, if you have any questions, just reach out to your teacher.